Everybody, welcome back once again. In this example, we're going to get a little more advanced, and I'm going to show you how you can use CSS3 to create some interactivity into your web page and have it kind of be backwards compatible with older browsers and things like that. They won't look perfect, but they'll look good enough and everything will still work. And so all I've done here is I've created a simple page. We have an H1 tag up here that says hover crafting because we're going to deal with hover states on each one of these. I have a list, an unordered list with links inside, and these are going to be our navigation. So this page 1 through 5, these are going to be our nav buttons. And then under that, what we have is just some Greek copy that I've thrown in. And I've wrapped everything up using the 960.js framework. So let's go over and look at the HTML. And primarily what we're going to be concerning ourselves with is this second div class here. And this is a grid 12. So if you're familiar with 960, and you should be at this point because we've covered that, inside of that we have an unordered list. I've given this a class. I've assigned it to the class of nav, short for navigation. Inside that you have 5 list items. Each one of those has a link inside. Okay, so that's how we're going to target this, and that's a pretty standard way to shell your navigation elements in HTML. It gives you a lot of versatility in terms of what you can do with it down the line. So let's go into our styles.css document, which is linked in our header, and all we have in here now is this .main. I given a padding on the top of 100 pixels, and that was simply what this hover crafting thing is, just to drop it down and give us a little visual interest there. But from here out, what we're going to be targeting specifically is these links and how to turn them into buttons and use some interactivity inside of those. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to target everything in that unordered list, which I gave the class of .nav. Why did I give it a class? Well, if I have other unordered lists on the page, I don't want this to turn those into buttons too. I only want to specifically target this one, and I want to be able to reuse it possibly, so we're going to use a class of nav. And I'm going to go ahead and give it some curly braces. And let's go ahead, and what we're going to do is say float right, because I want this to go over on the right side of the page. And let's give it a little padding because I want to have some padding on the bottom to drop that Greek text down just a little bit to give it a little breathing room. So let's say padding 0 top, 0 right, 50 pixels on the bottom, and then 0 on the left. And now if I go refresh the page, you can see that it did just that. It threw them over to the right hand side of the page and gave a little bit of space between that and the copy below. All right, so let's continue on. In the next one, let's target those list items. Now I want to say we're going to do these this way. I'm going to do this drill down type format. So if I go .nav for the class and then li, and then put my braces. This basically says that the styles inside these braces are going to target the list items that fall inside that nav tag. So the reason I'm doing this is I don't want all list items that could possibly be on the page to be affected. Again, I want them to be the list items that are inside the .nav, and I do that by just putting a space between these. Remember, if you put a comma between these, this means something entirely different. This means by the comma that the styles that I write in here will affect everything in the class of .nav and every li or list item on the page, and you don't want that. That will be bad. So we want this kind of drill down container type structure. So it's going to be .nav space li, not comma. Okay, so inside this, what we're going to do is display. We're going to display each of these as a block element, and that way we can float them. And we're going to say float is going to be left. And let's give them a little bit of margin so they don't bleed into each other, and say margin is going to be 0, 0, 0 on the bottom, and then 5 pixels on the left of each one of them. And then if I come back over here, refresh the page, they did just that. Now they are all sitting in a line. So they're starting to become more button-like. We're going to take this even further. Okay, so let's affect the anchor tag or the attribute in each one of these that describes the links. So basically that A tag. So we're going to do .nav space li space a. This will basically say that we're going to target all of the links, the A tags, that fall inside of a list item that fall inside the navigation element. So again, we don't want those separated. So if I have other links on the page, I don't want them to look like the buttons, or I could assign them to do that, but that's my choice. So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and give these some padding. Let's say padding is going to be 5 pixels on the top and bottom. And then let's say 15 on the left and right, so we're good there. Let's change the font weight. Font weight is going to be bold. And then let's give them a color. Color, let's just, we're going to change them to white, so pound FFF. And then let's give them a border of 1 pixel, solid, and then let's change this to a light gray, so pound EEE. And let's get rid of the underline on them, so text decoration is going to be none. And let's give them a text shadow. So let's say text shadow. And we talked about this in the last movie that we did on how to do text shadow. We're going to say 2 pixels, 2 pixels, a blur of 2 pixels. Whoops. PC is something else, 2 pixels. And then let's give it let's use RGBA just for fun. RGBA is going to be 0, 0, 0, 0.2. So this is going to, actually we might want to go 0.2 just to make sure the browser reads that. So we're good there. Let's check and see what this looks like. Let's refresh, and there we go. They're very light. It's white with a, so they're kind of hard to read, but we're going to adjust this in a second. But you can see that we did in fact get the border around each one and the drop shadows. They're starting to look like buttons. Okay, so let's continue on. Let's go back through. What we might want to do here is add a radius. Now remember, the radius had to do with the vendor-specific prefixes on these. So let's do the WebKit first. So it's going to be minus WebKit dash border dash radius. Remember, we talked about these before. We have to have, unfortunately, a heavy use of vendor tags here. So it's going to be 14 pixels. Let's go ahead and do Mozilla dash MOZ dash border dash radius. Is going to be 14 pixels. We'll make it the same. And finally, for all other browsers, we're going to say border dash radius. It's going to be 14 pixels. I know that seems like a pain, but that's just the way it is, unfortunately. Okay, so we're good to go here. Let's come back over and refresh. Got the border radius in, but actually I'm going to go back and let's change my color from pound FFF to, let's go to 333. Let's make it a little bit of a gray. There we go. So now I have, rather than having white on white, I have black text or gray text with the drop shadows, and we have, you can tell that they are indeed buttons. I might want to actually bring the color up on the radius also there. But now what we need to do is create the hover state. Okay, so this is what happens when I bring the mouse over the top. We're going to have a separate hover state for each one of these. So I'm going to drop a line, and we're going to continue as we've done. I'm going to say .nav li a colon hover. Okay, and let's go ahead and do the focus state as well. Let's do comma. See, we are going to use a comma here as well. And we'll do .nav li a colon focus. And this is the focus state that this might sit in. And so on the hover, what I want to do is I want to change the color now. The color is going to be white now, so let's go pound FFF, and then let's change the background color. So we'll go background, and let's use our RGBA attributes. RGBA, and let's say this will be kind of a gray, so let's go 0, 0, 0, and let's do 0.15. So this is going to be a 15% alpha channel on there. And now when I save that and go over, you can see that when I hover the mouse over each one of these, they actually change color. Okay, so I have a gray background, white text, and looking pretty good. Now what we're going to do is really bring some magic in here, and I'm going to show you how you can transition these states. So right now when I hover over it, it just changes to another state. But what I want it to do is smoothly transition from one to another, kind of like something you'd see in Flash, but we're not going to use Flash to do it. Okay, so to do this, what you do is we're going to go over the first state that we get to. So for instance, the hover state and the focus state, when I click on it, these are secondary states, so you don't see these first. So we want to start on the state that we begin with, which is going to be just the A tag. So I'm going to drop a line below that. They won't work the same if you put them on the state it changes to. Okay, so that's very important to understand. What we're going to do is we're going to use the WebKit, or excuse me, we're going to use the transition property, and unfortunately this is vendor specific and not all browsers support it. Okay, so what we're going to do is dash WebKit dash transition. And what we're going to do is say all, which basically means you can actually control the transition for each style. But I'm going to, and you separate them with commas, I'm going to use the word all. We'll break those out later. Most of the time, you're not going to transition things separately because it's a lot to deal with. So what we're going to do is say just all styles. We're going to say first, then we need to give it a time. So let's say 0.3 seconds. So 0.3s, and then what type of transition we want. And there are many available, but the first one, we'll break these down in future movies here. But let's say ease dash in dash out. Okay, so you do have some options and some control over these, but just follow me for now because I'm showing you how to introduce it. So basically, all styles are going to transition over the period of 0.3 seconds or 0.3 of a second. It's going to ease in and out. And we did this for WebKit. We've got to do it again for Mozilla. And I know this is the big pain of CSS3. Transition, colon, it's the same. All 0.3. Now, sometimes you can have a different syntax for a different browser, but we haven't dealt with that yet, and that's one of the reasons they break out. But anyway, ease in dash out. And then finally, let's do one for Opera. Dash O dash transition, colon, all 0.3s. Ease in-out. Okay, and other browsers, like old versions of IE and things like that, well, they're not going to work. They just won't work. But this is a transition. So if they're missing the transition, that's not a big deal. They still have the content. They still have the border, hopefully. They still have the drop shadow, things like that. They just won't have this transition. Now, what does the transition do? Now, when I go back over, refresh my page, you can see that when I hover over each of these links, they slowly morph into the hover state, which is pretty cool. Again, this used to require a lot of JavaScripting to do. If you're really mindful or concerned about backwards compatibility, in other words, going back to IE6 and stuff like that, then you probably want to use JavaScripting to do that, and we will do that in future movies. But this is a lot easier to write and a lot easier to edit and a lot easier to take care of. And you can see that we have a smooth transition in, and then when I go out, it transitions back to its original state very smoothly. So that is basically an example of how we would use a lot of CSS3 to create a navigation, create buttons. Remember, this was just an unordered list before, and we actually have these looking like little pillbox buttons now. I could add gradients to these and really make them look like buttons if I want. One thing that's still bothering me on this is the border probably needs to be more like 999, just because it's so light. I can't see it. There we go. So now when I transition, you can actually go over and see these. So anyway, so that's transitions using CSS3.